I'll do recording. Perfect. And then let me share my screen. And kill that.
On it, Ubers. Yeah.
Cool. And then let me go to Xcode.
Do you need anything else?
I think I'm all set. So it's like a lot of setup, a little bit more setup than I'm used to doing, but I would like to kind of kick things off. Let me plug in the screen here so you can all see. And so what I've been asked to do for all of you is to help you out with making a mobile app for a hackathon. So it's my understanding that, there we are. So it's my understanding that all of you, or some of you anyway, are maybe here for this Hack the Future hackathon, right? That's the one that's happening this weekend, Hack the Future. And the focus of that is like sustainability. Is that the idea?
Yes.
Perfect. How many of you are attending that hackathon? 2, 3, okay. That's awesome. So I have got a couple people here that like maybe want to learn how to make a mobile app for the hackathon. That's really cool. What do other people want to learn? So if you're like not here for like the hackathon and you're just like I'm here for something else, like, can I still help you by showing you how to make a mobile app? Awesome. Okay, cool. We can do that today. So just for like some background, mobile apps, I think, can be your hidden secret for winning a hackathon. I'll just say that flat out. Mobile apps, they're really small. If you think about it, if you're building a web application, it's got to look really big on a big screen. On a mobile app, you've only got a few screens and they're really small. And so it's a lot easier to do. It's a lot easier to pull off. And there are a whole bunch of tricks in a mobile app you can do that you don't need to worry about with a web application. So maybe it doesn't really need to talk to the network too much for like, for a hackathon, right? Maybe it's just something that you can kind of run on just your phone. Maybe you don't really need a login, right? Because everyone's got their own phone. They don't really need to log in and out. So you can skip that step, right? So there's a bunch of things you can do on a mobile phone that are going to help you win a hackathon. Just for some background, I used to do hackathons back in the day, and I won a couple of them, and they were almost always with mobile apps. So I would kind of compete solo. Back before there was such thing as like Major League Hacking and all that, kind of the pre-MLH type of days when it wasn't all college-based. So I would suggest that you learn something about making a mobile app, whether it's with Xcode, which is what I'm going to show you today, which is how you make an iOS mobile app, or with Android, or with web, or with React Native. So I think that's like a winning strategy for all your mobile app, for all your hackathon needs. That said, this is not the only way you can go. I like Xcode. I like iOS a lot. But my other like quick tip for all of you for a hackathon is either try and get into it to try and like win something. In other words, you're going to make something cool and impress somebody. If that's the case, use a technology you already know. So you took a Java class, you took a Python class, use one of those things you already know if you're trying to win the hackathon. If you're just trying to learn something cool, then it doesn't really matter like what, you're not like, hey, I'm going to win this big hackathon, win the prize from the sponsor, whatever it is. Go learn something new. And like, I think that iOS programming is actually approachable enough that all of you can probably, learn a little bit from here, maybe like do a tutorial or two, and then kind of have enough to hack together something over the course of 24 hours. So just kind of my take on things. It might work, it might not work, but let's kind of get started. So this is Xcode. Xcode is a free IDE, so integrated development environment. It's free on a Mac. The only catch is that it only runs on a Mac, and it only runs on a relatively modern Mac. So you're going to need a Mac that's running either the most recent OS or probably the one right before it to use Xcode. The good news is that Xcode itself is free. It takes up a decent amount of space on your hard drive, but you don't have to pay a fee just to make a mobile app that runs in the simulator. I'll show you that in a little bit, but it's basically an iPhone running on your laptop. You can, without paying Apple any money, you can actually run your app on your own device, like your own iPhone, your own iPad. You can run that on one of those. It'll expire, like the build will expire in like 2 weeks or so, but you don't need to pay Apple the $99 a year it takes to actually publish your app on the App Store if you just want to see your app running on a phone. You don't necessarily need to do that for every single project. But if you're doing something where you're like recording video or taking pictures, it's going to be a lot easier to do that on an actual phone than to simulate it with the simulator. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I haven't shown you what the simulator is. I've just kind of showed you Xcode. So Xcode, download from the App Store. It's just standard Apple Mac App Store. It's in there. It's free. And start it up and then click New Project. And you'll get this big wizard. So Xcode is one of those tools that tries to help you by giving you a little bit of like a start on your project. I don't recommend that you use their little start things to start your project for Xcode. The simplest one to create is the app. And you'll see up here, there's a bunch of different choices. You'll have multi-platform, iOS, macOS, whatever. I would suggest just using app. That's actually the simplest. These other things here, you're probably not going to use them to create anything. I can kind of dive into them a little bit, but I wouldn't use, like, for instance, if you're doing augmented reality, I wouldn't use Apple's technology for that. I would use Unity, the game development platform, instead. Anyway, so click iOS and then click app and then click next. And just for reference, I have a website with this tutorial on it. So it's called buildingmobileapps.com. And I haven't published everything on it for like my class, but I teach a spring semester class in iOS app development here at UT. And I wrote this tutorial and another one up here for the students in that class. So you're welcome to it. I'm going to drop this link into the chat. So if you want to follow along, let's see. Let me stop sharing and then I'll drop it into chat here. And that is the link to the tutorial. But like I said, it's at buildingmobileapps.com too. All right. So this is just kind of like walk you through it. I'm not going to really refer to that as such, but I wanted to give it to all of you because if you want something to look at later, that's basically what I'm going to do here over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. So when you start your new app project, you do need to fill in a few things. The first thing doesn't really matter too much. It's just your product name. You could just call this like Hackathon project and you would be totally fine. You're not going to have a team unless you pay Apple money for the most part. So don't worry about that. Your organization identifier can be almost anything. Just make it like com.yourname or something. That works just fine. It just has to be unique. Here's a really, really important decision that you need to make when you're developing with iOS is whether you're going to use one of Apple's technologies that's older or one of Apple's technologies that are newer. So the old technology is called storyboards, and that's the one I'm going to show all of you because it's better supported and you can be a little bit more advanced with your designs. They do have another technology called Swift UI that works very similarly to React if you've worked with that on the web. I like Swift UI. I think it's a great technology. I have a tutorial that does the same thing, but using Swift UI. But I'm going to show you Storyboard just because I think it's a little bit easier to understand it first. You can absolutely build most applications in both. And then the other choice you get is to use a language of Swift or Objective-C. There's really no decision to be made here these days. Stick with Swift. Objective-C is the older language, still supported, but no particular reason to use it. Let's be honest, for a hackathon, you're not going to include any tests. You're just kind of go. So we'll do that too. Click next, and then it'll offer to create a Git repository for you. If you don't have Git set up on your computer already, you may get an error here where it says like can't detect your Git global user or whatever. You'll need a Git repository if you're collaborating with a friend. If you're kind of solo hacking on this, or you're the only developer and you're working with a designer, you might be able to get away without Git. I always create my stuff with Git. If nothing else, when I break my code, it's really nice to roll back to like the last commit. All right, so this is Xcode. And this is what, if you're an iOS developer, you're going to spend like 90% of your time in, is this IDE here. So, and again, this is an integrated development environment. I can make this a big here, but not so big that I can't see it. This is a pretty good tool. It's not the best IDE out there, So, if you're working with web development, you may be more familiar with like Visual Studio Code. You may be a big fan of Vim or whatever it is for writing your stuff. If you work on the Android side, you're probably going to be in Android Studio. Xcode right now is pretty much the only solution for working with Swift. JetBrains did have an IDE, but they actually I'm not sure if they officially discontinued it, but they're not going to keep going with it. It's called AppCode. So you're kind of living in the Xcode world if you're going to be a native iOS developer. I don't think that's a terrible thing, but it just doesn't work the same way as all the other tools. So this is how you describe your project, right? Whole bunch of choices in here, but probably the most important choice for many of you is whether to make your app an iPhone only app or an iPad app or both. So if you make it an iPhone app, it'll still run on an iPad. It'll just kind of have like the black bars on the side. Or you can make it only run on an iPad and then it just won't work on an iPhone. Totally your choice. You can also pick whether it works in landscape or portrait mode. So you can decide that too. Like a lot of iPhone apps, they're only going to work in portrait mode with like kind of the top facing up, just so they don't have to think about it, right? It's like the app developers didn't feel like really testing out their code on like phone and landscape mode for most like productivity type of apps. It's just, most people don't use them like that. There are other choices in here, but I think most of them wouldn't necessarily apply to all of you. So I'll just kind of skip through that. Over here on the left, now, can you all see this? It's a little bit hard to see. Maybe. Okay. So I've got this up here in sort of like a dark mode for like presentation mode. Typically, yours is not going to look like this. It'll be black on white, but you can flip out the theme if you like. So this is all the code that Apple gives to you when you create your project. Most of this stuff you don't need to hack on. App Delegate, you might need to change if you're doing things like adding push notifications or bringing in like a third-party library. You might need to do some initialization in here. App Delegate is where your code goes that gets called after the application gets finished launching, or if you get a push notification or things like that. So you can set this up in here. Scene Delegate, you probably won't need to deal with that at all. View Controller, though, this is the core of a storyboards project in Swift. So I told you there were two different kinds of like iOS native apps, and one Swift UI and one storyboards. So I'm going to be talking about storyboards, and the core of those is the view controller class and then a corresponding storyboard view. So this is kind of where we're going with this. This is a generated class called view controller. Every screen in your iPhone app is going to have one view controller class associated with it. So I'm going to have like a home screen, I'm going to have a login screen, I'm going to have a detail screen, I'm going to have a map screen, whatever those things are. You're going to have one view controller class for each one of those. This project only has one screen. So what I just clicked on here is called the storyboard, the main storyboard. And this project generated one storyboard file for the entire project. Now, if you're going to start developing with a whole bunch of other developers, you'll want to refactor out your code so that you're using one storyboard for each view controller class, because these storyboards are really hard to version and get. They're XML underneath the hood, but they're not pretty XML. They're pretty ugly XML. And so they're really hard to get into Git and kind of do like pull requests on. So it's really nice if you only work on them one screen at a time. So I just helped the students in my class actually refactor their projects from using multiple screens in one view in one storyboard to like multiple storyboards, one for each view controller. Again, not something I'd totally worry about in a hackathon because it's kind of quick and dirty, right? You're going to get the project done. You're going to start the project at whatever noon, and you're going to show it off by 11 a.m. the next day or whatever it is. So, maybe like long-term maintainability, not the biggest priority, but you can create a new storyboard for each view controller. In this case, we just have one screen here, and this is the home screen. So if I was to run this project, which I can do, it's this little play button up here in the upper left. It's going to launch this screen up. It's completely blank, and it's going to launch it up in a simulator. There we go. Just a word of warning. This can be a slow process, just depending on how old your computer is and how fast it is. These things can take a little bit of time to launch. So this is it. My screen is blank because I generated it from like Apple and there's nothing on it. So I have a big blank app. But this is the simulator. This is actually, it's not an emulation. It's how to actually describe it. It's basically a representation of the iOS APIs running on your Mac. So it's not like a strict emulation like Android Studio, but it is, you know, pretty close to what you'd actually be running. So there it is, nothing to it, but that's not real exciting. This blank screen's not going to win us the hackathon, right? Like we actually need to have some stuff on here. So how do you start to add things onto your screen? And what you do is there's this little plus button up here in the upper right-hand side, and its name is library. So one of the things I am not crazy about with the Xcode interface is that it's very minimal. So if you're looking to add things on your screen, like I don't find it 100% intuitive that like there's a plus sign up there and that's where you add something to the screen. Like it's a very minimal design and they've changed it over the years. But this is the library you start to like, you can drag and drop things onto the screen. So if I take this label here, a label is a piece of text. Or it's actually, I should say this, it's a view that displays some text. I can click into this label and I can say, you know, hello, hackathoners. Like so. And then I can get that all centered up on my screen. And if I run this again, it'll say hello, hackathoners, right? So, you know, fairly basic stuff. It's very visual. So I didn't have to write any code to get this to work. I just wrote in hello, hackathoners. I'm not going to bore you all with like a 6-minute video. But if you take a look, Steve Jobs demos this tool when it was called Interface Builder during Next Steps years. So like 1991 or 87 or something like that. And this is like the same, I don't know if it's actually the same code, but it's the same exact like tool and everything like that, but just like 30 years later. And he basically demos just this exact little thing. He has a little tweak to it and stuff. It's kind of cool to watch, but I'm not going to make you all watch that during a 45-minute to an hour workshop. So we got a label here. And a label is a view that shows text. But like just having it kind of statically display text, that's also not like the best. So what we really want to start doing is we want to actually connect this up to some Swift code. So what I can do, and there's a couple different ways to approach this, but what I can do is I can actually, I'll show you the assistant. It's fairly clever, but the assistant can be quirky. So if I click the screen and I go up to the editor menu at the top and I go to the assistant, I get the screen on the left-hand side and the code on the right-hand side. So the tutorial I gave you, the one on the website, it's a little bit different. It gives you a slightly different approach, mostly because this is really hard to explain in text form. But if you're watching me do it, it's probably a little bit simpler. What I do is I click on Hello Hackathoners. And so if I click on it on the screen that I'm building, or if I click on it over here, this is an outline over on the left-hand side. That's actually an outline of all the things that are on the screen. So if I had labels and buttons and images, they'd all be there. Doesn't matter which one I click on. If I click on that, hold down Control and click and drag, you'll see that like, and again, it's a little hard to see on this big screen, but you see this little thing called Insert Outlet. And as long as I put this inside the class, and I'll talk a little bit about Swift in a bit, it's going to pop up a little tiny pop-up there that says Insert Outlet, and I just need to name my label. So I'm going to call this Hello Label, and click Connect. And wow, I've got some Swift code. So let me turn off the assistant. So I'm going to go back to preview. Actually, I can just click the X here to close the code. Go back over here to my folder and click view controller.swift. And that little like connection bit made a connection between the label, so the actual like view that shows some text, and my Swift view controller. So there are two different types of connections you can make with storyboards. The first one is called an outlet, and that's what I just made there. So that's called @IB outlet is like the annotation name. And then there's another kind called an action, which I'll show you in a little bit, but that's like if you want to make something do something. So we'll add a button with an action and that'll actually like change the text. But right now I have an outlet. So an outlet is kind of like a noun. It's a thing, and an action is a verb. So it's doing something. Any questions so far? Okay, cool. And feel free to like interrupt, because like I don't know how much experience all of you have with this stuff or whatever. So please like interrupt me if I need to explain things better. Like totally understood. Here's how you can tell if I made the connection successfully and didn't break it, is that over here, and I know this isn't going to show up on the recording, but over here, there's a little circle on the left-hand side, and it's in the line numbers, and it's filled in. So if I had broken this connection, or I never made a connection between this Swift code and the storyboard, this would be a hollow circle. So it's going to be right here if you're looking at the screen recording, right there on line 12. Right here, this is Swift code. So it's saying at ID outlet, that's what's called an annotation. It's basically a decoration that tells Swift that this is an outlet. And then I've got weak, which is related to the memory handling. And then I've got var. So var means that this is the hello label. This is the variable named hello label. And then Swift is also typed. So hello label : and then UI label is the actual type. So the classes that start with capital U, capital I, they come from UIKit, which is the iOS user interface library for the storyboard projects. So you're going to have to import UIKit. So up at the top there, you're basically importing a package or importing a dependency, and that's called UIKit. And then that includes things like the UI view controller, which is the base class for this view controller class, and then UI label, which is the label. All right, so that's a lot of explanation. What it's really saying is that I have this thing called hello label, and I can now refer to it in Swift. I'm inside a method here called viewDidLoad. ViewDidLoad runs after the storyboard gets serialized into memory and instantiates all those view objects. Remember how I said that the storyboard was kind of messy and like ugly if I like committed and worked with it in source control? That's because it's more or less a serialization of the Swift view objects. So you know, your labels, your buttons, whatever, they're all in there. And so what the storyboard is really doing is it's loading all those up and turning those into Swift objects for you. Once that's all done and they actually exist in memory, I can start to program them. So hello label. I will say this, Xcode has a nice autocomplete. If you let Xcode work for you, it will. Give it a little bit of chance if you have a slower computer. But you know, if I do hello label dot, I can see like a list of properties on this. And the one I'll pick is dot text, and then equals, and in double quotes, I just put in like some string. So instead of like hello hackathoners, I'm just going to say hi everyone, and I'll save it, and then I'll run it again. Now I've got a little trick here that will save you a little bit of time, but I always set this up on my computers, but I don't know why everyone doesn't, but maybe because it's just not obvious. I'm clicking play on the simulator and it'll actually restart the app project right there. Most of you, when you run Xcode for the first time, Xcode will ask you, do you want to replace the running application? Yes or no? And then it has a little checkbox to make that go away. Just make it go away. If you're trying to run the application to test it again, you don't want the old copy of it lying around. You can just click play. It's just working with students over the years. Sometimes people don't click that, and then, you know, throughout the course of the semester, they might be clicking that button every time they run the application, and they don't have to. You can just click one checkbox and it goes away. So just do that. You're not losing anything. It works totally cool. That said, our project just ran, and hello label.text no longer says hi hackathoners. It says hi everyone, right? So we never even saw it blink because this actually loaded in before the view even sort of appeared on the screen. So kind of neat. I'm showing that you can basically program this label here. I can do other stuff with it too. So hello label.text color equals, and I can use I can fully write out UI color.blue, and that would be to get me a blue text color. And I'll show you that. So if I run this now, it'll be blue. So that's kind of cool. But Swift is fairly clever. Swift knows that hello label.text color, the type for that property is UI color. So I don't actually have to specify UI color.blue here. I can just do text color equals .blue, and Swift can infer that that means UI color.blue. So I'll just show you that with like red maybe instead. So red, kind of exciting. There's all kinds of things you can change with your text colors. You can explore this by either looking at the UI label documentation, or I can go back to my storyboard over here. And if I click my Hello Hackathoners label, and I click, and again, this is one of those things that's not super discoverable in Xcode, but over here on the right-hand side, the 5th tab is called the Attributes Inspector. And if I click that up at the top, it's the one that has the little like sliders, I guess I'd say maybe. If I click that, I can actually see the attributes of the label as I design it in the storyboard, and I can change things here. So I can actually go ahead and change the font. So I might decide that I want a better font. And again, this is going to make your app look a lot cooler if you change the font. Go to custom, and then change the family to, let me pick a cool one here, impact maybe. I don't know if it's cool, but it's different. So let's make that big. All right, so I made this like bigger and, uglier maybe, but it's there, right? So it's like, all right, kind of got something going. This doesn't look like a standard app just yet. I can also go ahead and I can do things like add an image. So I could go to image and drag an image view down here. And then I could drag and drop an image into, there's a couple ways to get an image into your app. You can actually load one up from a web URL. It's not the easiest thing in the world. You actually have to, I would actually recommend for all of you to use a third-party image loading library. There's one called Kingfisher, I think is the name of it, that's open source. And I would just include one like that, because it's not as easy as just like setting an image view's URL to be like a URL. This is not the web. So if you're building a web page, right, the web browser knows how to load URLs and load them into things. In a mobile app, it doesn't work quite like that. It's not rendering HTML. It's rendering views, and it's rendering like programmatic components. And so there is no real concept of like a resource URL that gets loaded in. If you need to load something from a URL, you need to do that kind of explicitly by either using like a third-party image loading library or a third-party JSON library or something like that, or using Apple's direct API, which is called URL session. I don't think the URL session is real hard to use for things like downloading JSON or something like that. You can definitely use it for that. But if you're doing like image loading, you can find some code on Stack Overflow, I'm sure, that just uses the standard library. But I would just use a third-party library like SD-WebImage or Kingfisher or something like that, and just kind of like include that in your project, and then use UI image view. So just something to consider. If I had an image in my project, which I don't under assets, but if I was to go to, I'll steal one of my own images here, because let's see. So if I just save this image, I'll save it as Xcode image. And then if I load that up and save this as this is where I kind of remember where on earth I stuck this project. So it's going to be a little bit slow here. Why don't I just drag and drop it from someplace else? I take this and drag it to. So if I take that image and I drag it into my assets thing, and I'll show you this, there's a little, there's another file that gets created for you. It's called assets. And if you go in there, you can actually drop images into your project. So if I pick one from this one, I mean, that's okay, but let's just, every time I try and steal like a utexas.edu image, they're like, I don't know if they're like not real images or something, but they're actually really hard to just like right click download. So if you go to NASA, you can get an image of the day. Have you all picked like themes for your like sustainable hackathon project yet?
Not yet, because we haven't really announced the prizes. We're gonna do that during the opening ceremony.
Okay, cool. So like one of the big secrets to winning a hackathon is to have some sort of content in your application. And one of the big problems is finding content you can license or use. But luckily, the United States government gives you free stuff from NASA. So I don't know how space could fit into your projects, right? Maybe space is our final frontier. Maybe we're going to nuke Earth from orbit and all move to Mars. I don't really know. But if you were going to do something like that and make that the theme of your project, you can come to the NASA and get all kinds of cool images and data sets and everything else about asteroids and asteroid mining. Like you could totally go on like asteroid mining, right? I mean, that'd be kind of cool. Maybe that's where all the rare earth metals are that we all need. I don't really know. But more to the point, you can use these for free. So they're public domain. Let's just pick this one here. And usually, I think if it doesn't explicitly say that you can't use it, you can use it because it is a space thing that is paid for with our tax dollars. And okay, so this one's a little bit older because it's a Scott Kelly ticket in 2015. But I think this will look really cool in our projects. So I will save it. And I'll call it space image like that. And I'll put that one in here. The Xcode project's not real interesting. So delete that. We'll go for space image because I think that's kind of neat. If I go back to my main and I click my image view, I can come up here and pick an image. And the image I see here is space image. So look at that. I now have a jazzy image on my app. And if I was to go ahead and run it, you know, it's not the best looking app right now. It's not centered or anything like that. And, you know, Hiver one's kind of, you know, there. But maybe this is the start of my space themed app, right? You know, I can make this a little bit better. You know, we're just kind of hacking on it. But that's the way you add an image. So that's kind of cool. I'll move this up a little bit and then I'll add a button because I want to show you how to put an action to actually make your app do something. So come back to this library, grab a button and drag it maybe like right here in the middle. Now, I think the buttons that come out of Xcode are really ugly. In iOS 7, which is like 9 versions now ago, Apple took their buttons and made them all really, really boring. And so they all look like this by default in like your Apple apps. And Apple puts all these buttons in Xcode apps. So all your buttons, like if it was up to Apple, you would all be designing apps that look exactly like Apple's. But like you may have used other people's apps and they never look like Apple's, right? Because everyone else hates Apple's apps that's like a designer. So they never design them to look like Apple. But if you don't change the design of your app, it's going to look like one of Apple's system apps. So like a button here with just like no clue that that is clickable at all. So let's at least give that a little bit of help. We can change the background on it. So if I come down here and I look down here under view, everything that is a UI view has a background. So you can see view here, background here, and then it has a default like 100% transparent background. I can change that to a cool color. Down here, I've got all these cool choices to choose from. I'm going to choose indigo. That's a really stunning color, but I now can't keep that button blue, right? Like, I'm a pretty big fan of accessibility. And accessibility means a bunch of different things, but one of the things you want to look at is your color contrast. And I could load up a color contrast checker for you, but I don't really have to. You can't see this light blue on this dark blue button, right? It just doesn't work. So what I need to do is change the text color in this button as well. And I can do that by coming down to foreground. Yeah, foreground here. And then I'll pick maybe that really ugly yellow. But, you know, it doesn't really match our Hello Hackathoners. So I'll change the font too. Let's see. Actually, I'll leave that alone for now. I'll just leave that alone. But, you know, it's like better. It's yellow and blue, but whatever. It's clickable. Maybe it's more obvious it's a button. You can change that button to be like an image, like as the background. You can do all kinds of other crazy stuff to it. Every UI view, which is all those things here, like the image view, the UI button, and the UI label, those are all subclasses of something called UI view, which is like sort of the overarching view. It's also like very generic if you just want like a white rectangle or something to group other things. But they all have what's called a layer. And this layer lets you do cool effects. You can make like shadows. You can do rounded corners. You can do a bunch of other stuff. So if you were to go back into the Swift code, I could make like these things have like shadows or rounded corners or whatever. If I went ahead and went back into my assistants and right-clicked on the button. So again, I'm going to click on the button, hold down Control and drag, and I'll make an outlet for the button. So I'll call this my button. Perfect. And then I can do something like my button dot layer dot corner radius equals let's try running that and see what it does. This is not in the tutorial. I'm just kind of like making some changes. I would say that give it like a slightly rounded corner, but 4 is not maybe the best. I'll go with 16. That's a little bit more obvious. It's a button. It's got some nice rounded corners. I could jump that up to like 32 if I'm like really round corners, you know, whatever. So looks better. But I come here and I'm testing the app. You're showing the judge this cool app. You're like, this is my space asteroid mining app, right? And you're trying to get them to buy into it, right? And it's like, when I click this button here, it launches the whatever to the satellite that mines the whatever. You know, you're telling the story, right? But this button doesn't do anything, right? So like the judge maybe isn't buying that you built this whole like rocket launch system here. So let's make this button actually do something, but we need to connect it up to our view controller class with an action. So same mechanism that I used to do the outlets. I pick the button and I control drag and I click over here, and you'll see that this one now offers me the option to make an action or an outlet collection. So if I click here, I can make another outlet just like I just did with my button, but you really don't want 2 outlets to the same thing. You want an action. And again, that's the verb. And I'll call this one button clicked. And I'll click connect. And then that makes a nice little, let me close this out so you can see it. That makes a nice little Swift function for me. So this function is called button clicked, and I can have it do whatever I want. So let's make it do some stuff to make our app a little bit cooler. Perfect. So I'm going to set the background for the entire app to be green when someone clicks that button. Yay, look at that. So, you know, again, it's a little weird, but we could do that. This is kind of cheesy though. So let's go through and just change the text to be like mining the asteroid, whatever. Okay, so I'm gonna click this button up here, and yay, it says mining the asteroid, and now you convince the judges it actually did something. You could do more with this. Obviously, you could, you know, simulate something, whatever. You know, another thing in there, you probably don't want your button to actually say button. That looks a little bit amateurish. So let's go ahead and just change that to launch. Yeah, much better. Okay, all cool. We've got this up, but this app still has a fatal flaw. I'm designing it on the iPhone 14 Pro. That's like the biggest iPhone, right? So it's like the whatever that probably costs the most money from Apple. Got the biggest screen. So you're all set. You've been testing this in the simulator the whole time. Your designer buddy friend who you've been working on this with convinces you that it's going to look a lot cooler if you show it off on your iPhone that you have, right? But you've just got a normal size iPhone. You've got the, you know, iPhone 12 or whatever. And so you go to run it, and I'll show you what this looks like on an iPhone 12. I want to see what this looks like on an iPhone 12 by running it, I can choose a different simulator to run this on up here. I'll choose the iPhone 14 because it's actually I'll choose the iPhone SE because that's the smallest. And then I'll run this on the iPhone SE. And so this is what this app would look like if you were to load it up onto an iPhone SE right now. One cool thing is that if your computer's powerful enough, you can run multiple simulators at the same time. For most people, I think that like you can probably just try running one. If your computer's running slow, just close the old simulator for testing it. But what you can see here is that it's not totally terrible, but like our photo is now kind of like falling off the edge of the screen. The reason for that is the iPhone 14 Pro has like a width of whatever number of pixels, let's just call it 1,000 pixels. And let's just say that the iPhone SE has a width of 800 pixels, and I'm doing nothing to correct for that. Luckily, Apple has a way of working with constraints to fix this. Now, I will warn everyone that this is a major like problem, or I shouldn't say it's a problem. It's a major opportunity, but it's something that you may not want to take on for a hackathon. So this constraint system is really cool and it works, but it's really, really easy to back yourself into a corner with it. So if you're going for a hackathon, maybe you're just like, look, I'm going to design all this on iPhone, whatever it is, iPhone SE, and just kind of go with that. And I'm looking at the storyboard right now as an iPhone 14 Pro, but down here, I can actually swap that out for something else. So in the bottom toolbar, I can click iPhone 14 Pro and switch that to an iPhone SE 3rd generation, which is this one here. And I can actually see how it would render as a storyboard as an iPhone SE. So this might be another approach that you take is just like, again, think hackathon. You only need to demo it once, right? Judges are not going to like, they're not going to make you run on like mobile iPhones. I mean, that would be kind of like crazy because you're going to get like a very small amount of time to show this off anyway. So just maybe design it for the one you have. But if you want to learn how to actually code it right so you could develop it and release it on an actual app store, you need to use what's called auto layout. Auto layout is a series of constraints. So it's kind of like basically just solving a system of, it's effectively just solving a system of linear equations that you create here and a whole bunch of constraints like this has to equal this has to equal this plus 5, this has to be less than that, whatever it is. And you're basically just trying to satisfy that set of constraints. It's very visual. You can do this all programmatically. So if you ever hear of anyone talk about writing their views in iOS programmatically, you can do everything I'm showing you here in Swift code. So you can do it all programmatically. You can even write these constraints programmatically too, but you don't have to. You can use Xcode. Again, not a very discoverable feature. The auto layout tools are down here in the bottom right corner of this screen. It's going to be this little thing that looks like a bar chart. It's about 4 pixels tall, and another little thing that looks like a box of squares coming out of it. You'll need to use both of them for most of your stuff. Let me start, and what I'll do is I'll select Hackathoners and launch. You can select multiple things at once. And so if you click one and then you hold down Command, you can select another, and it's like multiple select. And if I click the little thing that looks like a bar chart, I can center them horizontally in the container. And I'll add 2 constraints. And then that is going to make them center no matter what size we're running on, whether it's an iPhone, iPad, whatever. You'll see, however, that I go red. So this is where you're going to run into problems, or you could run into problems as a developer. And especially think to yourself, not sitting in a classroom at 6 p.m. with, the teacher here with you, but think like 3 a.m., you're tired, you're, at Gates or whatever. And like, you're kind of like, what am I going to do? Anytime that you're using auto layout and you see this red, like the red boxes, or there's like a little red arrow up there, that's saying that you don't have enough constraints in your system. Xcode can't solve your layout. And so if you were to run this now, it might look good, or it might just all like squish up in the top left of the screen or something. Anyway, this is Xcode trying to warn you, you're not ready to go yet. Not a big deal. My suggestion is start from the top and work your way down with adding these constraints. So what I'll do is I'll take Hello Hackathoners and I will constrain it to the top. So I click the little box with arrows sticking out of it. And then it has a little box with another little like tiny little line. And then I can pick like how many pixels I want this to float underneath the top bar. So I'll click 50 maybe, and it'll kind of ride up to the top. The one underneath of it, I'll do something similar. So that says 132. I'll make it 40. Just kind of sits up there. And then this one here, I don't want to center it. What I've decided that I really want to do is maybe like have it use as much of the screen as possible, but give it like a little margin on the right-hand side. So I'll click the same constraints thing. I won't make it horizontally center, but what I'll do is I'll set a top constraint of like 40. And then it looks like just, my little magic maneuvering here gave me margins of 20 and 20. So I'll stick with those and I'll add 3 constraints. Ooh. Oh, I know what I did. And then I'll hit Command Z because I also need to give this one a bottom constraint. So I'll say that like, maybe it's like, I know what I'll do. I'll say that it's like 40, 20, 20, and then I'll specify the height. So I can click over here and I can say that I always want this to be a height of 280 or whatever. Actually, I'll make it an aspect ratio because that's actually what's going on. And add 4 constraints. All right, so that looks pretty good, right? So I've kind of designed this, and now I have constraints that connect the top of Hello Hackathoners to the top of the screen. I have another constraint that connects launch to the Hello Hackathoners. I have one that connects the top of this image to launch. I've got a constraint connecting this side of the image to this side of the screen. Same with this one. And then I've got another one that sets the aspect ratio of this to be a consistent aspect ratio. And if I look at this as an iPhone SE, I think it looks pretty good. I mean, it could take some tweaks, but it's all lined up. Let's just try this out on an iPhone 14 Pro Max. I guess it's the biggest you can get. And look, I mean, the app still looks clean. If I go to iPad, this is a big iPad. So let me zoom back out. Okay, that's like a monster iPad, like 12.9. But, I mean, it still works, right? So, my app is now like looking pretty good. And I can tweak all these things later. If I was to go in and decide that like there's too much space between this one and this one, I pick space image, and then I come over here to this triangle. And then over here, these are all my constraints. I can click one and delete it. And again, just saying, if you're stuck late at night with this, you just may need to go in and clean out your constraints. And so what you do is you click one and you just hit delete. I'm not going to delete because like then I have to put it back. But you click it and click delete. So actually I can click this one, click delete. It's gone. But if I decide that like maybe like 40 pixels is like not looking so good, I can change this to 20 by clicking edit. And then it'll kind of move it up. Yes. Command Z. Yes, because remember, I actually deleted the aspect ratio one, and it did make it like drop down because it lost its bottom constraint. So I actually did Command Z. So excellent point. You can use Command Z, or you can do edit and undo. It's the same exact thing underneath the hood, but yes, Command Z is your friend. So is git commit. Another huge hackathon thing. The last thing you want to do is find out, like, again, 3 a.m., it's all broken, it's not working, and then you realize your last commit was like 7 p.m. Like, it's a lot better if your last commit was like 2:30, and you can just like stash all those changes and go back to what worked. So like just a little hackathon trick there. Yes, excellent question. I think we're more or less towards the end of this class. We've got about 5 minutes left. So who has questions? Or are you all like ready to go build your space apps? Yes.
How do you connect it to like that new?
Excellent question. So very good question. So I will show you that. Let me make this a little bit smaller. So I will just go back to iPhone and just make it, yeah, that one. So you can actually get like mobile screens on there. So I've got this here. And now, excellent point. You want multiple screens for your project. So what I'll do is I'll go to the library. And again, I told you all you should have multiple storyboards for mobile screens, but this is a hackathon. We're just kind of, stick one here. I look for another view controller. And I drag that here. And now I've got a second screen. And just for like reference, I'll drop a label on it that says like second screen or something like that. So I'll actually just take this label here and I'll put it here. It'll say second screen. Oops. And then I will just kind of cheat and give that a very simple like horizontal and vertical center. All right, cool. So that's just going to show us that we have a second screen. Now, in iOS, you have a couple different choices for how to get between screens. There's really three that I'll talk about. The first is navigation, and that's the most likely. So if you have a list of things and you click on one, you go to a detail, it's going to push. So it's called a push, and it's going to like give you a little animation. You'll have a back button, it'll take you back. That's what I'll show you now. That uses something called the navigation controller. There's another approach called the tab bar controller. So what I can do is I can have up to like 5 tabs, and it's the basic tab bar you've seen at the bottom of a lot of apps. And each of these view controllers can live in one of those tabs. And when I click into one of those tabs, I see the screen that matches that. The third way is going to be called what's the modal pop-up. A modal is a user interface term that basically says that you're working with a screen or you're working with a dialog box or something, and you have to dismiss that before you can go back to whatever you're doing. It's like kind of in your face. It's blocking you, stopping you from doing anything. And you can use that too as well. That's called the modal. I'm going to show you navigation. So what you need to do, and this is like another little trick I didn't tell you about. Storyboards have multiple screens, or they can have one screen, but if they have multiple screens, the way that you can tell that the first one that loads in, it has this little checkbox, or I'm sorry, not checkbox, has a little arrow on the left-hand side of the screen that is the first screen to load. However, if we're going to use a navigation controller, that needs to be the first screen to load, because it's kind of like a navigation controller doesn't have its own user interface. It just kind of controls everybody else's. It shows the screens in order, or however you decide to make it work. So the trick for getting one on there, the easiest way, is you click the view controller that you want. So the one that started it, and I will click it on the left-hand side in the outline. So I'll click view controller up here, and then I'll go to the editor menu, and I'll go to embed in, and I'll pick navigation controller. Now I told you all about the tab bar. If I wanted one of those, I would embed it in a tab bar controller, but I will embed it in a navigation controller. So now you can see that I have a navigation controller here, and it's blank. So it's like there's no screen. I can't put buttons or things on this navigation controller. It just doesn't really work like that. It's going to just display this next one. And the thing that links them is this. Oh, you can see the navigation controller has a little arrow pointing in because it is now the first thing to load. And that's really, really important. If I click this little arrow here, that is a relationship arrow. And that is going to point to the very first screen the navigation controller loads. And that is called the root view controller. So I'm going to show you the app right now. I'm going to rerun it. The two screens are the navigation controller and the screen we're working on are linked. The second screen is not linked. So this is it running in just the navigation controller. But we want to show that second screen off. The easiest way to do that is to put in a button that says like second screen or something. If I click that button, hold down Control, and make a connection to the second screen like that, it pops up a little dialog box, and it's going to give you a choice of what are called segues. So S-E-G-U-E, and that is pronounced segue. And that is your choice of how to display the second screen. Show is what we'll do. So show is like the navigation controller, like I'll show you. It's like a little animation and stuff. I could also present modally if I wanted to have it like pop up. If I present something modally, something on that second screen, like a button, has to dismiss it programmatically. I'll just use show, and then we'll have a little back button. So if I do show like that, and then I run this again, second screen is barely visible because I didn't use my thing. But if I click that, it'll take me to the second screen like this. And then I have a little automatic back button up at the top of it that takes me back. Let me just move the second screen, and I'll add a little constraint to it. So it's just underneath the space image. And I'll also make that one centered horizontally too. Just so you can see it. Cool. So second screen like that. Now you may be wondering, that's kind of cool. I can show the second screen against a hackathon. You can kind of make it do whatever you want, pretend the data got passed, or you could just hard code the whole thing, right? But what you'd actually do is you would write a method in your view controller that called prepare for segue, and that would pass along whatever data to the next view controller that you need to set up. So what I do is on my second view control. Oh, this is really important. So something I did not show you. This second screen by default does not have a Swift class associated with it. So let me show you that, because that's really important. You can't make this second screen do anything cool until it has its own Swift view controller class associated with it. So let me add a view controller class to our project. I'll go to Hackathon project. I'll go to file and new. File, new file. Like so. I will pick a Cocoa Touch class and click next. I want to make sure that it's a subclass of UI view controller, and I'll call this one second view controller. Or I'll call it space view controller. Doesn't really matter. It's just it's a programming name, so it doesn't really matter what it actually is. Like a user would never see it. Now click create. And now I have a space view controller. And now I could do something like make the background color red when it loads or something. That's all really cool. It won't actually do anything just yet, because I need to go back to my storyboard and tell the storyboard that this second screen is actually an instance of the space view controller. So it's an instance of UI view controller, which is built in, but I want to say that it's an instance of the subclass. So I click the view controller up here. Then I click this fourth tab here on the right-hand side. I know, so discoverable. And I click over here, and it's like I get to pick a class. If I click the drop down, I can see all the ones that are in iOS, but there's my space view controller. And if I was to run this project now, I should see that second screen show up being red. Yay, look at that. So fancy. So that's how you can tell the space view controller is activated for this second class. So that's how you connect stuff. Yes.
How does it do like possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we do is on your space view controller, you would have some properties. So var so let's just say that we have a property called space background color. So I'll make the view background color to be space background color. So that's kind of cool. We'll make this UI color.red. And that has to be UI with a capital. All right, so you got that. And then we've got over on the view controller, we have this prepare for segue. So again, I'm going to use the Xcode autocomplete to kind of fill that in, but it's called prepare for segue. And it's going to look like that when I'm filled it in. And I can do, yes, okay. So the segue is the little like thing that I drew. So the segue is like that little arrow that I drew, and it's got like a source and a destination. The destination is going to be that second screen, the space view controller. So I can get that destination as a property on the segue, like that. Oops, if let VC. Okay, I do love live coding up on stage with unprepared material, so we'll just hope this works. If it doesn't compile, it's totally on me. But what we're doing here is we are getting the destination. So the destination is always going to be it's always going to be UI view controller, but Swift is like clever. It lets you detect to see if that is a subclass of space view controller. And if you become a Swift developer, you'll get really familiar with like if let and guard and guardlet and things like that. But what we're doing is we're checking to see if this cast works. You all know what like a cast is, like casting between classes and stuff like that. Cool. So space view controller is a subclass of UI view controller. And what I'm doing here is in Swift, I'm checking to see if if I can get this destination as a space view controller, then I'm going to declare a constant named VC, which is just short for view controller. And then this VC is now an instance, or it's now a type of space view controller. So I can set that space background color, which is the custom property I put onto that. I'm setting that to black. Now, if I go back to my main, you can see right now it's white. So if this actually works and doesn't crash, you should see nothing on the second screen because it'll be black on black. Look at that. So my label is black, but my screen is black. So maybe I'd want to go here and make this something not black. I'll make it, oh, I don't know. Green. Yeah, again, it's hideous, but that's okay. All right, so I'll click second screen and look at that. So this is a space view controller. I can pass data back and okay, I can't paste it. I can only pass data one way with this. If I wanted to share data between everything, so like like a common data model or something like that, there's a couple ways to do that. The easiest is to have a singleton, frankly. You'd have a singleton on like your app delegate or something like that. That's not like the best way, but it'll certainly work for Hackathon. It'll certainly take most of you through building like your first part of apps. If you want to go a little bit further with that, you could look into like storing your data in like user defaults. So if you want to store data in between runs of the application, you can store basic keys and values in what's called user defaults. If you want to store it in an actual database, there's one built into iOS called Core Data that you can basically store data in. It's an object relational mapping layer. There's other solutions out there, but those two will, Core Data can definitely scale with whatever the heck you're building in a hackathon. So that shouldn't be a problem. But yeah, so that's how you pass data. And so what you'd actually really be doing though, is rather than like passing like a background color, like this whole thing here might be like a list, which in storyboards called a table view controller. And you can have a list of things. And if you click like one of the rows in the list, you would probably pass that object that underlies it over to the detail view controller, and it would display like a better like view of it. Like think of like an email list, right? You get the subject and the sender and the date maybe in the list. Then you click into it, you get the whole email. All right. Any other questions I can answer? Y'all pretty psyched about your sustainable hackathon ventures? Cool. Awesome. Well, I encourage you all to do mobile apps, but if you're also like, yeah, this isn't for me, totally cool. Take on something else with this. It's a hackathon. So go learn something new. If you're not there to win it, definitely try and learn something new. If you're there to win it, go with something you already know. That's my big advice. All right. I will stop recording.
So much. Thank you.
Sure.